There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It lives deep inside the spirit, the kind that forms when you have loved too hard, cared too deeply, and carried emotions far heavier than your own. And when that exhaustion arrives, something sacred happens. Your soul begins to pull you back. Not out of coldness, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. If you have ever felt yourself slowly drifting from people you once held close, if you have ever wondered why your heart suddenly chooses quiet over confrontation, if you have ever felt guilty for creating distance you didn't fully understand, stay with me till the very last word, because this message will show you that your distance is not a weakness. It is your spirit finally choosing peace. There comes a time in every person's life when the heart can no longer carry the weight of what it has been holding. It is not a loud moment. It does not arrive with dramatic storms or fiery endings. It arrives quietly, like a tired whisper at the end of a long night. It arrives when you have tried every way of showing up, every way of loving, every way of explaining, and still found yourself unseen, unheard, or misunderstood. And in that moment of exhaustion, a sacred truth unfolds. Distance is not abandonment. Distance is a form of self-preservation. People misunderstand this because they think closeness is proof of love and stepping back is proof of indifference. But the soul knows better. The soul knows that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to create space between you and the people, places, or patterns that drain the life from you. Space to breathe, space to heal, space to return to yourself after losing pieces of your identity, trying to be everything for everyone. Distance is the body's way of saying, I cannot keep absorbing what hurts me. It is the heart's way of whispering, I am tired of fighting battles I never chose. And it is the spirit's way of stepping between you and the pain, refusing to let you break any further. When you withdraw, when you become quiet, when you stop responding with the same intensity you once did, it is not a sign that your love has died. It is a sign that you have reached the limits of what your heart can endure without collapsing. There is a gentle intelligence inside you that senses when your energy is being misused. It notices when you are the one always listening, always forgiving, always understanding, always carrying conversations, always carrying the relationship. It notices when your emotional labor has become the foundation of a connection that gives you little in return. And that inner intelligence pulls you back, not to punish anyone, not to end anything out of anger, but to give you a chance to refill what has been emptied. Distance protects the parts of you that you once gave away too freely, the parts that were stepped on, ignored, or taken for granted. It shields the softest corners of your heart so they can recover from what they have endured. It prevents you from pouring from an empty cup and pretending it is still overflowing. Distance becomes your shelter when the world around you has become too heavy to hold. People often believe that walking away is the same as giving up, but there is a difference between surrendering and choosing yourself. You are not retreating because you are weak. You are stepping back because you finally realized that you are worth more than the pain you've been tolerating. When you distance yourself, you are telling the universe, I deserve peace. I deserve reciprocity. I deserve boundaries. And that is not abandonment. That is emotional survival. Loyalty does not require you to destroy yourself. Love does not require you to stay in spaces where you are shrinking. Connection does not require you to carry more weight than your spirit can bear. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is honor your limits. Honor your need for quiet. Honor your need for solitude. Honor your need for emotional oxygen. You cannot save others if you are suffocating. And you cannot keep pouring love into places that leak. Distance is also clarity. When you step back, you finally see things as they are, not as your hope painted them. You begin to notice who reaches out when you become silent and who only noticed your value when you stopped giving. You begin to realize who cared for you and who cared for the access you provided. You start understanding which connections were genuine and which were one-sided illusions that lived only because you kept feeding them. And in this clarity, you grow. You learn to protect your peace not as a last resort, but as a habit. You learn that the right people will never require you to abandon yourself to stay close to them. You learn that distance does not destroy love, it destroys illusion. And what remains after the illusion fades is the truth. Sometimes that truth is painful. Sometimes it is liberating, but it is always necessary. Your distance is not a wall, it is a doorway to rediscovering who you are when you are no longer performing, no longer pleasing, no longer adjusting yourself to be acceptable. It is a return to the version of you that existed before exhaustion replaced excitement, before emotional responsibility replaced joy. When you step back, you meet yourself again. The self that had been buried under expectations, disappointments, and unspoken pain. And this return to self is not abandonment of others. It is simply the beginning of honoring the promise you made to your soul long before you ever loved anyone else. The promise to protect your heart, to honor your emotions, to keep yourself whole. Distance does not close your heart, it cleans it. It makes space for grief, for reflection, for release, for rebirth. It makes room for the truth you've been avoiding and the healing you've been postponing. It creates silence where wisdom can finally speak. It gives your soul a chance to wash away the heaviness you've collected from carrying too much for too long. People may not understand your withdrawal. They may call you distant, cold, detached, but they do not know the storms you survived silently. They do not know the nights you held yourself together. They do not know how many times you tried, how many chances you gave, how much of yourself you poured into places that did not pour back. Your distance is not their story to interpret. It is your boundary to protect. You owe no one an explanation for choosing yourself. You do not need permission to heal. You do not need validation to step away from anything that threatens your inner peace. Distance is not abandonment. It is choosing to finally stand where your heart can breathe, where your soul can rest, and where your spirit can rise again. There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that lives inside the heart long before the world ever sees the signs. It begins slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the dimming of a candle whose flame has been burning too long. The heart keeps giving, keeps trusting, keeps hoping, keeps extending itself toward others, even when the weight becomes heavier than it can bear. The heart wants to believe that love can fix everything. It wants to believe that effort is enough. It wants to believe that patience will eventually be rewarded, so it keeps pushing long after it knows it should rest. But the heart, for all its beauty, is fragile. It bruises easily. It breaks quietly. It carries memories it never speaks of, burdens it never admits, and disappointments it never expresses. And because the heart feels so deeply, it also tires deeply. It becomes weary from holding emotions that have nowhere to go, weary from understanding people who never understand it back, weary from carrying relationships that do not share the load, weary from giving chances that are misused, from forgiving wounds that keep reopening, from explaining truths that fall on ears unwilling to listen. The heart gets tired of waiting for someone to show up the way it shows up. Tired of being strong in situations that should never require such strength. Tired of caring for others while no one is caring for it. tired of holding space for people who disappear when it needs space held for itself. This exhaustion is not sudden. It builds like quiet waves, rising from deeper places until one day the heart whispers, "I can't carry this alone anymore." And that is when the soul intervenes. The soul does not speak loudly. It does not rush in with chaos or anger. It steps forward gently, like a guardian who has been watching everything in silence. The soul knows the heart better than anyone. It knows the heart's limits. It knows the heart's breaking points. It knows what the heart refuses to admit. The soul sees the tears the heart hides. It feels the pressure the heart endures. It witnesses the moments when the heart tries to be strong but crumbles alone in the dark, and when the soul senses that the heart is close to shattering beyond repair, it takes command. It begins to create distance, not out of coldness, not out of cruelty, not out of abandonment, but out of pure protection. Distance is the soul stepping in to say, "Enough. You have carried too much. Let me take this from you." Distance is the soul drawing boundaries the heart was too loving to draw. Distance is the soul creating silence where the heart was too emotional to be still. Distance is the soul separating you from chaos the heart was too tender to walk away from. And this distance often confuses people. They mistake it for indifference. They think you no longer care. They assume your feelings have suddenly disappeared. But feelings don't disappear. They retreat for safety. Because the soul knows that if the heart continues without rest, it will break in ways that take years to heal. The soul knows that preservation must come before connection. The soul knows that your spirit must be protected, even if it means stepping back from what you once cherished. The soul knows the value of your peace, your energy, your inner world, your emotional stability. When the soul takes over, you begin to withdraw quietly. You lose interest in conversations that drain you. You stop responding to people who take without giving. You become selective with your energy, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. You stop explaining yourself because the soul knows that those who did not understand your silence will never understand your words. You pull away from noise, conflict, drama, and emotional chaos, not because you are weak, but because the soul is guiding you back to yourself. The soul creates distance to restore balance. It knows that the heart has poured too much into places where nothing poured back. It knows that the heart has been loyal to people who were careless. It knows that the heart has been patient in situations that did not deserve patience. It knows that the heart has been sacrificing pieces of itself just to feel valued. And when the soul sees this self-sacrifice turning into self-damage, it intervenes. It refuses to let the heart give what it no longer has. Distance is the soul's medicine. It is the space where the heart can finally breathe, where the mind can finally think clearly, where the spirit can finally release what it has been holding. In this distance, you begin to notice truths you were too close to see. You recognize patterns you kept excusing. You see the imbalance you kept normalizing. You feel the peace you kept postponing. Distance gives you perspective, and perspective gives you strength. And in this strength, you begin to reclaim yourself. You reclaim your energy. You reclaim your boundaries. You reclaim your emotional worth. You reclaim your identity outside of people who drained you. The soul teaches the heart that love is not meant to feel like exhaustion. It is not meant to feel like begging. It is not meant to feel like constantly proving your value. Love is not meant to break you. It is meant to expand you. The soul teaches you that your heart is precious, that your emotions are sacred, that your presence is a gift. It teaches you that you are not meant to pour endlessly into empty spaces, that you are not meant to stay in environments that compromise your peace, that you are not meant to shrink yourself to be tolerated by others. The soul reminds you of your worth when the world forgets to. So when distance begins to build around you, do not fear it. Do not label it as coldness. Do not shame yourself for it. Distance is simply the soul stepping in with wisdom the heart did not yet have. It is protection in its purest form. It is the universe guiding you back to the truth of who you are, preserving the parts of you that survive too many storms. There are moments in life when the noise around you grows so overwhelming that it begins to seep into the quiet corners of your mind, the places you once escaped to for peace. You start to feel everything too strongly, the expectations, the pressures, the demands, the unspoken responsibilities. The world becomes loud not only with words, but with obligations, with emotional weight, with people pulling at your energy from every direction. You wake up already tired, not because you haven't slept, but because you haven't rested. And in that weary state, silence starts calling you back home. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of interruption, the absence of constant need, the absence of the emotional noise that drains your spirit before you even realize it's happening. Silence is the place where your soul can breathe without being judged, pried into, or demanded from. When the world becomes too loud, silence becomes the medicine your heart has been quietly praying for. There is healing in the moments where no one expects you to respond, to perform, to give, to explain, or to prove anything. Healing in the moments where you are simply allowed to exist without carrying anyone else's emotional weight. Silence gives you permission to stop pretending you're okay when you're not. It gives you a chance to listen to your own thoughts without being drowned by other voices. It becomes a sanctuary, one you didn't even realize you needed until the world became too much to bear. As the noise grows, silence grows more valuable. When people demand your time, your energy, your compassion, your understanding, your patience, your presence, often all at once, your spirit begins to feel thin, stretched, worn. The weight of constant interactions, constant expectations, constant responsibilities slowly erodes your sense of self. And yet you continue because you are used to showing up for everyone, even when you are breaking. But the soul knows when enough is enough. The soul begins to pull you inward, guiding you toward the healing that can only be found in quiet. Silence lets you hear what your heart has been trying to tell you for months. It lets you feel emotions you've been suppressing. It lets you understand the pressures you have normalized. It lets you recognize the toll that too many demands have taken on your mind. In the middle of the world's chaos, silence becomes a gentle mirror. It reflects back the parts of you that have been overlooked, not by others, but by yourself. The loudness of the world often teaches you to keep moving, keep giving, keep proving, keep smiling. But silence teaches you to pause, to rest, to stop running from yourself. In silence, your spirit uncurls from the tightness it has been holding. The tension slips away, the fears soften, the mind clears, and the heart finally releases its hidden burdens. Silence does not ask you for anything, and that alone is healing. When life becomes loud, silence helps you return to your center. It helps you reclaim your energy. It helps you remember who you are separate from who the world needs you to be. Silence gives you the clarity to see where you have been stretching yourself too thin, where you have been giving too much of yourself, and where you have been ignoring your own well-being. It brings your awareness back to the present moment where peace still exists, even if in small pieces. There is also power in silence, a gentle, steady kind of power. In silence, you are no longer reacting to the world. You are no longer being pulled by demands or drained by conversations that don't feed your spirit. You regain control over your inner world. You choose who to let in, what to focus on, where to spend your energy. The noise of the world can manipulate your thoughts, but silence reconnects you with your truth. When you sit with silence, you begin to feel the difference between what is heavy and what is yours. You start to recognize which pressures were never meant to be carried alone. You understand that sometimes the loudest moments in your life are the ones that push you toward the quiet that saves you. Silence helps you separate your peace from others' chaos. It teaches you boundaries, not by force, but by gentle realization. There is something sacred about the stillness you find when you step away from the noise. When you sit alone in your room, or take a walk under an open sky, or simply close your eyes and breathe deeply, the world softens. The constant demands fade, the endless noise calms, and in that moment, you meet yourself again. You meet the version of you that is not exhausted, not overwhelmed, not stretched thin. You meet the version of you that is whole, even if you forgot they existed. Silence gives your thoughts room to settle, like dust falling to the ground after a storm. It allows your emotions to surface one by one instead of crashing all at once. It gives you strength to face what you've been avoiding and space to let go of what has been hurting you. Silence reveals what you truly need, what you truly feel, what you truly want. And that revelation is the beginning of healing. When the world is loud, you often lose yourself without realizing it. You become so focused on surviving the noise that you forget how to hear your own voice. Silence brings you back to that voice. It becomes a soft reset, a quiet homecoming, a gentle reminder that you are allowed to step away from demands that exhaust your soul. And so silence becomes healing, not because nothing is happening in it, but because everything you have ignored finally has room to speak. Silence holds you in a way the world never does. It restores what noise steals. It repairs what chaos damages. In silence, you do not feel small, overwhelmed, or demanded from. In silence, you feel safe. You feel grounded. You feel whole again. There comes a moment in every person's life when you realize that your spirit has been whispering the same message for a long time. A message you were too busy, too giving, too emotionally invested to hear. It is the quiet truth that you cannot keep pouring yourself into everyone else and expect to remain whole. It is the truth that caring for others is beautiful, but caring for yourself is essential. And when that truth finally reaches your heart, something shifts within you. You begin to withdraw, gently, silently, without announcing it, without anger. Not because your love for others has faded, but because your love for yourself has finally awakened. For years, perhaps, you showed up for people in ways they never showed up for you. You checked in, you reached out, you listened, you forgave, you adjusted, you held space for their storms, even when you were drowning in your own. You cared deeply, sometimes more deeply than was healthy. You gave your energy generously, believing that compassion was always noble, even when it cost you pieces of your own well-being. But the truth is that constantly showing up for others while abandoning yourself is not kindness. It is self-neglect. And your soul knows when the scales have become unbalanced. It knows when your emotional generosity has turned into emotional exhaustion. It knows when the care you offer others has begun to drain the care you owe yourself. So slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to step back. You stop responding instantly. You stop absorbing everyone else's problems as though they are your responsibility. You stop letting people treat your energy like an endless resource. You start noticing how tired you are, not physically, but spiritually. You withdraw because your inner world is tired of being the place where everyone else comes to unload their burdens. You withdraw because you are finally acknowledging the weight of what you've been carrying. You withdraw because you realize you cannot continue sacrificing your peace just to keep others comfortable. People may misunderstand this. They may think your silence means you don't care. They may assume you have grown distant, cold, detached. They may even accuse you of changing, but they do not see the exhaustion underneath your quiet. They do not see the years of emotional labor. They do not see the nights you stayed awake worrying about people who never once wondered how you were doing. They do not see the internal battles you fought to keep certain relationships alive. Your withdrawal is not a withdrawal from love, it is a withdrawal from depletion. You begin to understand that caring for others should never require abandoning yourself. You begin to understand that your compassion should not demand your destruction. You begin to understand that you are allowed to step back when giving becomes too heavy. And you begin to understand that the space you create is not a punishment to others. It is restoration for you. You withdraw because your peace matters. You withdraw because your mental clarity matters. You withdraw because your heart can no longer bear the weight of one-sided connections. You withdraw because you finally see the cost of your constant availability. Withdrawal becomes the moment you choose to listen to your own needs you have ignored for far too long. Needs like rest, needs like emotional boundaries, needs like time to breathe without being pulled in 10 directions, needs like the simple right to exist without constantly being needed by someone else. You withdraw not because your heart is empty, but because it is finally protecting what remains. The parts of you that have been stretched, drained, and overused are asking for space. Space to heal, space to recalibrate, space to feel safe again. Your withdrawal is a return to yourself, a reclaiming of your emotional territory. You start to realize that not everyone deserves unlimited access to you. You start to realize that not everyone who needs you is good for you. You start to realize that caring for people who do not care for themselves will destroy you. You start to realize that saving everyone else often means losing yourself. And so you withdraw, not as an act of abandonment, but as an act of survival. Withdrawal is your soul's way of pulling you back from environments that starve you. It is your intuition protecting you when your heart is too loving to protect itself. It is the deeper part of you finally saying, I matter too. You withdraw because your self-worth is rising. You no longer seek validation through overgiving. You no longer define your identity by how much you can tolerate. You no longer confuse self-sacrifice with loyalty. You finally understand that you are allowed to love people while also loving yourself enough to step back from what harms you. And in the quiet that follows your withdrawal, you begin to hear your own needs clearly. You begin to rest. You begin to think without external noise clouding your mind. You begin to rebuild the energy you've poured out for years. You begin to recognize the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependence. You begin to feel the weight lifting from your chest. Then something beautiful happens. You begin to choose yourself with intention. You begin to value your peace more than people-pleasing. You begin to protect your energy like the sacred thing it is. You start saying no without guilt because you finally understand that your yes was never meant to be given out endlessly. You start recognizing who respects your boundaries and who resents them. You start to see who was benefiting from your lack of limits. And you start letting go, softly, quietly, without dramatic endings, of anyone who requires you to abandon yourself to stay connected to them. Your withdrawal is not a judgment against others. It is simply the moment your spirit refuses to let you live exhausted. You withdraw because the love you gave others, you are now learning to give yourself. And this shift is not selfishness, it is self-recognition. So you pull back, not out of bitterness, not out of indifference, not out of punishment, but out of a profound understanding. You have finally started caring for the one person you spent years forgetting, yourself. There comes a time in life when you realize that holding on is not strength and letting go is not weakness. Growth teaches you this. Not suddenly, not in one lesson, but in many small, painful awakenings that accumulate over the years. You begin to understand that clinging to what no longer aligns with your spirit does not protect you, it drains you. And so, slowly, gently, quietly, growth begins to guide you toward the kind of release that doesn't come with bitterness or regret, but with clarity, softness, and acceptance. Letting go used to feel like a violent act. It felt like breaking something in your own hands. It felt like abandoning a piece of your heart. It felt like failure, like quitting too soon, like not trying hard enough. You were taught in different ways that loyalty meant endurance, that love meant sacrifice, that commitment meant holding on even when everything in you was asking for peace. But growth teaches a different kind of wisdom. Growth shows you that letting go is not an ending, it is an honoring. You begin to let go gracefully when you understand that not everything you love is meant to stay forever. Some people are chapters, not entire books. Some moments are stepping stones, not destinations. Some connections were only meant to teach you something about yourself, not carry you through the rest of your life. And when you see this truth clearly, the grip you once held so tightly begins to loosen. Growth teaches you that you can release someone without anger, because anger is often just love without a place to go. It teaches you that you do not need resentment to justify moving on. You do not need to hate someone to create distance. You do not need to burn bridges to walk away. You simply need to accept that the path you are on no longer flows with theirs, and that acceptance is enough. Releasing without guilt is one of the hardest lessons of all. You spent so much of your life prioritizing how others felt, how your choices affected them, how your absence might hurt them. You stayed longer than you should have, tolerated more than you deserved, endured what drained you, all because guilt whispered that leaving was cruel. But growth shifts this perspective. Growth reminds you that self-abandonment is the real cruelty. Growth tells you that you cannot sacrifice your peace just to keep others comfortable. You learn that you can wish someone well from a distance. You can appreciate the memories while still choosing a different future. You can be grateful for what something once meant to you while also acknowledging that it no longer fits who you are becoming. Growth teaches you that letting go is not an act of erasing. It is an act of evolving. The grace in letting go comes when you stop seeing yourself as the villain for choosing your well-being. You stop apologizing for outgrowing environments that once felt right. You stop feeling guilty for needing quiet where there was noise, stability where there was chaos, truth where there were excuses. Growth helps you release the idea that you owe your lifetime to people who were only meant to be with you for a season. Letting go gracefully is not about distancing yourself abruptly or shutting the door harshly. It is about stepping back with gentleness. It is about acknowledging that what once was beautiful is no longer sustainable. It is about honoring the love you gave, the effort you offered, the moments you shared, while also honoring the person you are becoming. Growth softens the heart. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you wise. It helps you recognize when your energy is being misused or when your presence is no longer nurturing your spirit. It gives you the courage to say, "This chapter is complete," without bitterness, without blame, without needing anyone to be wrong in order for you to choose yourself. You begin to understand that people change, timing changes, purpose changes, and clinging to what no longer aligns will only cause pain, not because the past was false, but because the present has shifted. Growth teaches you to respect that shift, to accept that parting ways is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the other person. Graceful letting go means recognizing that some relationships are not meant to end with dramatic conflict. Some simply dissolve as you evolve. Some fade because your spirit no longer resonates with what used to feel familiar. Some drift because your heart has learned new truths about its own needs. Growth teaches you to embrace this natural fading without forcing it, without clinging, without trying to resuscitate something that is gently asking to be released. And when you finally let go gracefully, something powerful happens. You create space, space for healing, space for clarity, space for peace, space for people who match your growth, space for opportunities that align with who you are today, not who you used to be, space for the freedom that comes with no longer carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be yours. Letting go gracefully also means letting go of the version of yourself that kept trying to fix what wasn't your responsibility. You release the parts of you that tolerated too much, said yes too often, stayed too long, or loved too deeply at the expense of your own heart. Growth teaches you that transformation requires shedding old versions of yourself. The versions shaped by survival, by fear, by longing, by confusion. You leave behind the version of you who believed that love is measured by endurance. You leave behind the version of you who thought that staying meant caring. You leave behind the version of you who carried guilt for wanting more, needing more, deserving more. Growth teaches you that you are allowed to evolve, and not everyone can go with you. So you let go, not in anger, not in revenge, not in cold silence, but in quiet reverence. You honor the journey, you honor the lessons, you honor yourself. And in that moment, you finally understand what growth has been trying to teach you all along. Letting go is not losing. Letting go is becoming. There comes a moment in every person's life when distance stops feeling like a choice and begins to feel like a necessity, an instinct, a gentle but firm pull back toward your own center. You don't wake up one morning and decide to detach from people you once poured your heart into. It happens slowly, like the tide withdrawing from the shore. At first, you don't even notice the shift. You keep giving, keep bending, keep stretching yourself thin to hold everything together. You tell yourself that love requires effort, that loyalty requires sacrifice, that patience requires endurance. But one day, something inside you whispers that you've wandered too far away from yourself, and that whisper becomes the beginning of your return. Distance becomes the path you take home. When relationships are unbalanced, when you are the one always holding, always fixing, always understanding, always absorbing, they start to chip away at your identity. You begin to forget what it feels like to be held, to be understood, to be seen without having to explain yourself. You lose your voice in the noise of trying to keep someone else comfortable. You silence your needs to avoid conflict. You soften your truth to avoid being misunderstood. You shrink your light so others won't feel threatened by your glow. And little by little, without realizing it, you disappear. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying relationships alone. It is not the exhaustion of physical work or emotional expression. It is the exhaustion of imbalance. You start to sense that you're giving more than your heart can regenerate. You notice how much energy you spend managing other people's moods while they make no effort to understand your own. You see how often you're extending compassion that is not returned, how often you're holding space for conversations that never hold you back, how often you're forgiving people who never apologize. This imbalance becomes a quiet grief, a mourning of all the parts of yourself you have sacrificed along the way. And so distance arrives, not as coldness, not as punishment, but as restoration. It begins with small steps. You start saying no when your entire life has been shaped around saying yes. You start pausing before giving instant responses. You start choosing silence over explanation. You begin to guard your energy the way you wish others had guarded your heart. You feel the truth sinking in, that you can love someone deeply and still need space from them, that you can care without sacrificing yourself, that you can walk away without resentment because you finally understand that your peace is the ultimate responsibility. Distance does not mean you stop loving someone. It means you start loving yourself enough to return to what you abandoned within, because there are parts of yourself that were waiting for you: your joy, your softness, your clarity, your courage, your dreams. You left them behind while trying to maintain connections that were draining the very soul of you. But distance has a way of clearing the fog. When you step back, you start to see the relationship as it truly was, not as you hoped it would be. You see the imbalances you overlooked, the disrespect you tolerated, the emotional weight you carried alone. And in that clarity, you rediscover yourself. Distance gives you room to breathe, to think, to realign. It allows you to remember who you were before the world convinced you to forget. You begin to recall the things that once brought you joy, not the things you did to make others happy, but the things that lit up your own spirit. The music you stopped listening to because someone mocked your taste. The hobbies you abandoned because someone didn't value them. The dreams you set aside because someone else didn't believe in them. Through distance, you walk back into the forgotten rooms of your soul and turn the lights on again. You start to notice how much space you gain when you stop trying to fit into places that were never designed for you. You realize that peace feels more important than pleasing, that solitude can be a sanctuary rather than a punishment, that your heart has been asking for rest for far longer than you could admit. And in this quiet space, you meet yourself again, not the version shaped by expectations, but the version shaped by truth. Distance teaches you that relationships should never cost you yourself. It teaches you that love without reciprocity becomes self-destruction, that effort without balance becomes self-neglect, that empathy without boundaries becomes self-erasure. You learn to stand in your worth without asking anyone's permission, and you learn that the right people will never make you choose between them and yourself. They will meet you where you are. They will understand your silence, respect your space, and value your presence because they recognize the heart behind it. Most importantly, distance gives you the gift of perspective, the understanding that not everyone you lose is a loss. Sometimes the people you step away from were blocking the path back to your own spirit. Sometimes their absence is the reason you finally bloom. Sometimes separation is not the breaking of your life, but the beginning of your healing. You begin to see that your soul was never asking you to abandon anyone. It was asking you to return to yourself. And when you return, you come back stronger, clearer, more aligned. You come back with boundaries shaped not by fear, but by self-respect. You come back with a heart that loves more wisely, more gently, more intentionally. You come back with a deeper understanding of what connection truly means, not the constant sacrifice of your identity, but the meeting of two whole beings who uplift each other without imbalance, without pressure, without losing themselves. Distance is not the escape. Distance is the remedy. Distance is the unfolding of the self you compromised for far too long. It is the sacred space where you reclaim the pieces of your soul scattered through years of unreturned effort. It is the pause that turns into clarity, the silence that turns into strength, the solitude that turns into rediscovery. And when you finally stand in the fullness of the person you were always meant to be, you realize that distance was never the end. It was the way back to yourself. There comes a time in your life when you stop waking up with the weight of other people's expectations pressing against your chest. A moment when something deep inside you, something ancient, wise, and quietly powerful, refuses to keep living through the judgments, desires, and demands of others. That something is your soul, and when it rises, it does so with a clarity that can no longer be ignored. For years, you may have lived as a reflection of what others wanted you to be. You shaped your choices around their comfort, your words around their reactions, your dreams around their approval. You learned how to bend, soften, shrink, and mold yourself just to be accepted. You became skilled at pleasing, even when it drained the very life out of you. But the soul has limits. Gentle, sacred limits. And when those limits are crossed for too long, it steps in and says, enough. The soul doesn't speak in noise or force. It speaks in knowing. It speaks in uneasiness when you betray yourself. It speaks in the fatigue you feel when you keep saying yes to things that hurt you. It speaks through the heaviness in your heart when you perform for the world while abandoning your inner truth. And eventually, it speaks so loudly that ignoring it becomes a form of self-betrayal. Your soul begins choosing peace over pleasing. Peace is not passive. Peace is not silence. Peace is not hiding from the world or avoiding conflict. Peace is alignment with the truth of who you are, without distortion, without performance, without fear. Pleasing, on the other hand, is a quiet suffocation. It forces you to put your own needs beneath the needs of others while hoping that love or acceptance will be your reward. But pleasing has no end. When you give people the power to define your worth, they will always want more. They will always find one more thing for you to fix, one more expectation for you to meet, one more version of you to become. But your soul knows better. Your soul knows that real love does not demand the destruction of your selfhood. Real connection does not require you to betray your values. Real relationships do not punish you for having boundaries. So when your soul begins to choose peace, it begins to pull you away from the loudness of expectations and into the quiet of authenticity. It begins teaching you that your energy is sacred, your truth is sacred, your alignment is sacred. It teaches you that no validation is worth the cost of your inner harmony. And so your soul chooses alignment over approval. At first, this shift feels unsettling. Approval has been a safety blanket for so long that living without it feels like stepping into unfamiliar territory. You worry about disappointing people. You fear their opinions. You're afraid of being misunderstood, judged, or rejected. But alignment has a way of dissolving fear. When you start choosing what feels right over what looks right, you discover a freedom that approval could never give you. Approval binds you to other people's stories. Alignment roots you in your own. In alignment, you begin listening to the subtle movements of your spirit. You feel what resonates and what doesn't, who drains you and who nourishes you, what lifts your energy and what collapses it. You learn to trust your intuition, that inner compass that has tried to guide you since the beginning. You learn to pause before reacting, to breathe before agreeing, to reflect before committing. You realize that you weren't created to live a life shaped by fear and performance. You were created to live a life shaped by truth. And that truth brings you to the most powerful shift of all, choosing your inner truth over external expectations. External expectations are endless. Society has them, family has them, friends have them. Even strangers who barely know your name carry expectations of who you should be, how you should speak, how you should behave, what you should want, how you should live. And for so long, you may have carried these expectations inside you as if they were laws you had no right to question. But your inner truth was never built to live in confinement. Your inner truth is the essence of your soul, its values, its purpose, its desires, its wounds, its wisdom. It is the compass that points you toward the life that is meant for you, not the life others try to assign to you. When you begin choosing your inner truth, you shed the weight of performance. You let go of the masks. You stop living to be understood and start living to be whole. You realize that authenticity is not rebellion. It is alignment. It is self-respect. It is honoring the voice within you that you silenced for far too long. And once you begin listening to that voice, you cannot go back to living for approval. The taste of inner peace becomes too precious. The feeling of alignment becomes too grounding. The power of truth becomes too liberating. Choosing your inner truth means you accept that not everyone will like you, and you understand that this is not a tragedy, it is protection. Those who require you to abandon yourself to keep them comfortable were never meant to stay. Your soul will remove what no longer supports your growth, even if your heart hasn't yet found the courage to let go, because the soul is loyal to your wholeness, not your habits. It is loyal to your destiny, not your comfort. It is loyal to your truth, not your fear. And when your soul takes the lead, your life begins to change. You start building connections where you are valued, not used. You begin choosing environments where your energy expands, not contracts. You start trusting yourself instead of doubting yourself. You discover clarity where there used to be confusion, strength where there used to be hesitation, authenticity where there used to be performance. This shift is not selfishness, it is self-restoration. It is the moment you return to the person you were always meant to be before the world told you who you should become. And in that return, you realize something profound. Your soul was never asking you to be perfect. It was only asking you to be true. When your heart gets tired, your distance is not a punishment to others. It is a promise to yourself. A promise that your peace matters. A promise that your spirit deserves gentleness. A promise that you will no longer shrink just to fit into places that do not honor your depth. So walk softly, rest deeply, and let your soul guide you back to the life, the love, and the peace that were always meant for you.